Hola a todos. Buenas tardes. Good evening. Buenos días. Buenas noches. Wherever you're at, welcome to En Casa con la Plaza, brought to you by La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. This is our series of presentations, conversations, panel discussions, performances, a mixed bag of this and that will entertain you, that will educate you, that'll get you thinking. Today we have our second partnership event with the Mexican American Educational Cultural Foundation. And to introduce you to our panelists, our guest speaker, and our co-host is a good friend of mine, somebody I'm sure you all know, that appeared here on En Casa con la Plaza a couple months back, Belle Hernandez of Latin Heat Media. Take it away, Belle.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're so excited. We are always excited about the Mexican American Cultural Education Foundation History Maker event because we get to talk about people who are doing some wonderful things in our community, and we want you to know all the wonderful things that they're doing. So the Mexican American Foundation, if you don't already know for any of the newbies here, was founded by Dr. Jose Luis Ruiz to fulfill the mission of changing the narrative about Mexicans, Latinos with unity, pride, and education. And we do that in this History Maker event by introducing to you some of the wonderful speakers that we have. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Jose Luis Ruiz, who I met just last year. And he told me about the Mexican American Cultural Education Foundation. And I really loved the mission. So I'm part of the advisory board, and we have some wonderful advisory board members that make things happen. And today, let me just give you some information on Dr. Jose Luis Ruiz. So he is nationally recognized as a professor of cosmetic dentistry who lectures nationally and internationally. He is the author of the very popular cosmetic dentistry textbook, Gingival. Gingival. There it is, Gingival. Minimally invasive dentistry. So the textbook is Gingival Minimally Invasive Dentistry. It was published by Wiley Blackwood, and Dr. Ruiz is also the best-selling Mexican-American novelist. He has also been named as a 3-time finalist for the prestigious International Latino Book Awards for his novel Irreversible Damage, the Katie Suarez Social Justice Series, including he got a Best Latino Focused Fiction Book and the Best Novel. These were all the different areas that his book was awarded in. So Dr. Luis relocated to the United States from Mexico City as a young man, and he began his life as a Mexican immigrant, contemplated society with an educated eye, which ignited his passion for activism and socialism. For he is looking for social change. And this is what the Mexican American Cultural Education Foundation is all about. It's time that we all come together for unity, so that we can change the narrative. And with that, I introduce you to Dr. Jose Luis Ruiz.
Well, thank you, Belle. What an honor and what a pleasure to start our wonderful event. And you're right, the purpose of our organization is to change that intentionally distorted narrative that we are all very aware of. And I think we're all tired of listening to this intentionally incorrect terms like, let me go get a Mexican from the Home Depot. Or a movie like A Day Without a Mexican, where the premise is if Mexicans were not around, then the Americans wouldn't have maids and gardeners. That's such an offensive thing, and we know, and we will learn throughout our day, our evening, the reason why this has happened. I mean, there is actually a reason why, and that's why our association is called the Mexican American Cultural Education Foundation, not the Latino, because you never hear those things about, let me get a Latino from the Home Depot, or that all of those things, of course, even terrible things like, like Trump has said that the Mexicans come from this drug-infested land. And of course, we know that the reality is completely different. And that's why we want to, introduce you, our friends, to this amazing people. We have had interviews and we have had speakers that you would be very, very impressed. Luis Valdez and Alex Nogales and Ambassador Julia Nava, and of course, Bel Hernandez. And today, Mexicans, incredibly successful people that we're very proud of. Summa cum laude graduate of Princeton, Dr. John Morán González, Professor Trinidad Gonzalez, and of course, our Mexican-American history maker, a powerful woman that is really changing the way the perception of the Mexican-American and of course the Latinos in general. And we on all our events, we always want to remind our friends that all of those terrible things that I said at the beginning, which people say and do all the time, are absolutely incorrect, because who we really are is very, very different. We need to be very proud, and we encourage you to be very proud that, our culture has been the center, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecs, this was a concentration of incredibly advanced culture. And after the Spaniards arrived, a new people was created that developed one of the most powerful colonies in the continent. In fact, the richest colony in the continent. So we have so many things to be proud of. Our ancestors, build a beautiful cities. In so much culture that our ancestors have, that Mexico City is the city that has the most museums in the world, because there's so much history and so much culture. So we want to remember that when people say those negative things. We certainly are very proud of our culture, and we should be very proud of our culture. The Mexicans are not lazy. Mexicans are hard workers, and so much so that we want to remember that Mexico has a economy that is the 12th to the 15th largest in the world. That means that our ancestors and our cousins living there are not lazy. They're hardworking, just like we all Mexican Americans are here in this country. So this is what we're all about. We're all about remembering who we really are. And today we have just a spectacular day for you. We're going to learn things that sometimes we have forgotten, because it is very easy to forget. Why is it that that this negative, this corroding information was initially started in California and Texas? Oh, hold on, I want to share with you this slide right here, because we're going to learn that California and Texas and Arizona, had a beautiful culture. That Mexican culture with the cowboy culture, with the beautiful architecture, the beautiful food. And why is the reason that then, how did we end up in this situation in these states? And the reason is because there was a desire after America conquered these states to to take the possessions away, to take control of this new land. And as you can see right here, something that happened after the Mexican-American War, there was an intention to get rid of the Mexicans and to defame the Mexicans. And all of that has come all the way to the present time. Knowing history is very, very important. And we're gonna learn a little bit of history today when we learn from our professors from Texas about their research on refusing to forget. So I'm very, very excited to share with you this information today. And let me start by introducing our friends, very, very proud of this professors from Texas who have really digged out a lot of information that is going to be very valuable for all of you, our friends. So let me introduce to you Professor John Morán González. Professor González is an associate professor in the English department and the director of the Center of Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas in Austin. Author of The Border Renaissance, the Texas Centennial, and the Emergence of Mexican American Literature and the Troubled Union Expansionist Imperatives in Post-Reconstruction American Novels. Professor Morán González attended Princeton University, graduating magna cum laude and AB in English Literature in 1988. At the Stanford University, he also earned an MA degree in 1991. Along with Dr. Morán González, we have Professor Trinidad Gonzalez. Also very exciting, very proud of him. He's a history instructor at South Texas College. He served as the American Historical Association Teaching Division Conciliator between 2014 and 2017, and his research areas include Lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas during the early 20th century. They're gonna educate us about refusing to forget. So Professor Morán González, Professor Trinidad González, the audience is yours.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to first thank our gracious host for having us here this evening with you. And being a literature professor, I have to start out with a quote from William Faulkner. And he famously once said, "The past is never dead, it's not even past." And I think that's true more than ever these days, as we daily see and perhaps even participate in the social justice movements happening on our streets over the past couple of months, regarding the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Now, our communities know that the problem of police brutality and law enforcement mistreatment is not new. This, in fact, is a very old problem, and one that we will examine in some detail today. But first, let me go ahead and start off by sharing the screen with you and to introduce our project, the Refusing to Forget project, which is a public history project formed in 2013 by 5 scholars. Professor Trini Gonzalez, Professor Ben Johnson, Professor Sonia Hernandez, and Professor Monica Munoz Martinez, all his professional historians. And then there's me, the odd lit guy. So in any case, we decided to form this because we're all from Texas, and most of us are actually from the Lower Rio Grande Valley, which, if you imagine a map of Texas, is at the very, very southern tip. It just got hit by the hurricane this past few days. And so the one thing that we wanted to make sure came back into public consciousness was the history of the Valley, which is really the nation's history. It's Mexican-American history, but it's the nation's history. What occurred down there between 1910 and 1920 was extraordinarily violent, extraordinarily intense, and all but forgotten. So that was the paradox we were facing. Why did we have to bring back to public consciousness something that was so formative to the history of this part of Texas, to the history of Mexican Americans, but had essentially been forgotten or erased in our history books? You know, professional historians knew about this, but if you asked your average Texan, they would have no idea. And why is that, right? That was the core of the question. Well, because if you know anything about Texans, you know they're obsessed with their history. Texas history is a huge part of Texan identity, but that history, or at least the one that gets told through the school curriculum and through museums and through most venues, is really about white Texas. It's not about Black, Indigenous, or Mexican American history, despite their centrality to the state history. So we had to work to bring this back. And that's what Refusing to Forget decided to do back in 2013. Now, you have to imagine, too, this is right when Black Lives Matter was getting started, right? And so what we were seeing in our investigations was a parallel. That is, the treatment by law enforcement, particularly the Texas Rangers, of Mexican Americans in the lower Rio Grande Valley had direct resonances with what was going on with Trayvon Martin and Eric Gardner and all the other African Americans who were unjustly treated by the police. So the same problems kept propping up, and that's what provided the resonance and the impetus for us to bring these stories back to public attention, to make sure that the public conversation about them continued and did not die forgotten, you know, and ignored as they had been for 100 years. Now, I think with that introduction, I will go ahead and turn it over to Trini to really get into the events themselves.
Okay. If you want to forward the slide,
Yes.
see us for a minute, or can I do that too?
I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, why don't you go ahead and start while I...
Okay, I think the arrows on the bottom left there, to forward. Hi everybody, my name is Trinidad Gonzalez. I want to thank John for providing that introduction. I want to thank everybody for inviting us and the work that we all do collectively across California, Texas, Arizona, the rest of the United States, you know, New Mexico, to talk about hard history, complex history, but history that many of our families know and that we've been taught through barbecues or family dinners or get-togethers of some sort. And so in putting together the presentation, we wanted to talk about, I guess, one event for two reasons. Now, we cover the history of Texas in the lower Rio Grande Valley, the whole state of Texas, but we want to look at 1910 to 1920 in particular because of that decade's bloodiness related to what we call state-sanctioned killing of Mexicanos, Mexican Americans. By state sanction, what that means is that the state, in this case, the state of Texas, the government was fully aware of the killings and even sanctioned the killings. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And so we picked this one event. Now, there are many more events where law enforcement or vigilantes or soldiers were killing Mexicanos prior to 1915 and after 1915. But we want to focus on 1915 because it's such a seminal event related to the numbers of people killed within that time period. Okay, so let me provide some context for the lower Rio Grande Valley. Again, as John said, if you look at a map of Texas, it's the very southern tip, and it's right there on the border with Mexico. Now, this is an area that had been settled by the Spanish going back to the 1749. So it was under Spanish occupation. Of course, prior to that, it was under indigenous occupation. We cannot forget what the Spanish did to the indigenous communities that were there and continue to live with us today that we still need to respect and honor. But they were there in 1749 on forward. Now, it was one of the most successful colonial efforts by the Spanish in what is North America, what is outside of Mexico, in the sense of how prosperous the individuals were. It was an entrepreneurial ranching community. The Spanish government didn't have the money to fund them, so they came with incentives to get land and tax relief to develop the land and their cattle operations. So briefly, you know, we go through obviously the Texas War of Independence, which did not include this area, even though Texas, the Republic of Texas claimed it. And then later on, we get with the Mexican-American War. Now, post-Mexican-American War, people who own their lands are successful in defending their land titles. And this is key. They're successful in defending land. They will prove legally this land belongs to them, to the state of Texas and to the United States government. So when we get to 1904 and the railroad starts to come in, you're going to see a very much a transformation of the political structures there. Now, by 1910, 50% of the land, for instance, in Hidalgo County, was still owned by Mexicanos. Now, David Montejano, a former professor at UC Berkeley, will talk about that as a decline, and it is obviously a decline from 100 to 50%. But unlike other parts of the Southwest, like particularly in California and Arizona and other parts of Texas, land loss was immediately occurring after 1848. It was just a dramatic loss of land. And our part of the world, that didn't occur. So when the railroad comes in 1904, and you have people coming in to now farm the land, they are not happy with the fact that 50% of the land is still owned by Mexicanos. And they're having a hard time ousting them or having them have those individuals removed. Okay, so what we see by 1910 is the beginning lynching or increased lynching of Mexicanos. It was going on before that, but it increases. In 1911, in Laredo, Texas, we have the first statewide civil rights meeting, El Primer Congreso Mexicanista, to resolve these issues civilly, right, through a peaceful sort of movement of civil rights advocacy. In particular, they're responding to the lynching of Mexicanos by law enforcement and others, or with the cooperation of law enforcement. That's key here. Law enforcement is intertwined with lynching. You cannot have lynching without the cooperation of law enforcement, without the cooperation of the government in power. Okay? And so when they met in 1911 in Laredo, they were trying to figure out a way to advocate to get this to stop. Well, in 1915, we're going to have an insurgency in South Texas or in the Valley. It's popularly known as the Plan de San Diego. While it's supposed to have occurred in February of 1915, nothing happened. In fact, the military complains that white people are more paranoid than they're justified. We get to July of 1915, you have law enforcement starting to execute prisoners. You have 6 people killed before the first insurgency or the first act of rebelling back against the state of Texas and the United States government. And a manifesto was produced in August, basically saying we are now fighting for our rights as human beings. We're fighting for our rights as individuals who deserve life, liberty, and property, right? These are the same values that were expressed by the founders of this nation. So they're not expressing anything that's outside the norm of the United States or its history. What was not accepted, it was that Mexicans were advocating, in this case, using guns for those rights and the protection of those rights, right? So the law enforcement killings is the impetus for the insurgency. As a result, there is then a backlash where individuals are picked up and killed, right? And the insurgency is going to have about 80 battles and skirmishes between the US military and the insurgents. The problem is most of the insurgents could never be caught. And so what ended up happening was that individuals were accused of supporting or being an insurgent, and they were executed on the spot by Texas Rangers. In fact, one unit was sent down by the governor of Texas at the time with specific orders to clear the areas of Mexicans. Now, it just so happens that people who were accused of being bandits happen to own land. And we do have testimony where individuals said, I would take a ranger with me, or somebody pretended to be a ranger and told them, you need to sell to me or this guy's gonna come back and basically kill you, which had already happened, right? And so between June to November of 1915, we estimate on the low end 300 Mexican and Mexican Americans killed by Texas Rangers, vigilantes, really paramilitary groups that are in league with the Texas Rangers. Sometimes soldiers are involved. as well, and local law enforcement as well. And so the people began to call this the Matanza of 1915. And the first time I came across this term was doing research, where I read about the Matanza in an editorial from 1929 by a writer named Santiago Guzman, one of the founders of LULAC, by the way. And it was in reading the Matanza that came home to me, because in that editorial, my great-grandfather's name was mentioned, who was killed by the Rangers. So I am a descendant of an individual, or individuals that were killed by the Rangers. Both my great-grandfather and his father were killed out at Laguna Seca Ranch in 1915. And so seeing this in print and having grown up with these stories as a child was very, very shocking, right? Because I didn't hear the term Matanza from my family, but the term was then used to relate to my family's history, right? And so I'm one of hundreds of thousands of people who probably have these histories that we shared within our families, and that we did, as Refusing to Forget says, these stories need to be told to a public audience, and it needs to be validated by the state of Texas. And here's the historical marker where Texas said, yes, this history occurred. Rangers were responsible for killing Mexicanos. And so this is the beginning reckoning of the state of Texas for this history and these events, but we're not anywhere close to having a true reckoning of this history. And this is the process that we still continue today. John, I don't know if you want to take over the next one.
Yes. Well, this leads to some of the efforts where we talk about some of the efforts that Mexican Americans were involved in to seek justice over this massive denial of due process to an entire community. Remember, law enforcement, particularly the Texas Rangers, are executing people with no due process whatsoever. And so the sole Mexicano, Mexican-American state representative, J.T. Canales, Jose Tomas Canales of Brownsville, brought it before the state legislature in 1919 and managed to get an investigation going by the legislature. Now, so this marked one of the first successful attempts by Mexican Americans to use the mechanisms of the state to get the state to police its own agents, right? So it wasn't ultimately very successful, but nonetheless, it's an important moment because really that had not been possible before. But in any case, over 2 weeks, the eyewitnesses provided 1,600 pages of testimony about Ranger atrocities during the 1910 to 1920 period, and particularly with the Porvenir massacre of 1918, where it was a tiny hamlet in far west Texas where 15 Mexicanos, men, were rounded up from their family and separated from their families in the middle of the night by Texas Rangers and US cavalry troops, marched out and summarily executed. So, and left to rot out in the open. So this atrocity was what prompted enough outrage to get the investigation going. And this, but the Porvenir massacre and many other similar incidents were detailed in this enormous investigation. But despite all this, there was still a culture of impunity for law enforcement. No Rangers were indicted, much less convicted. Some of them, one of the Ranger bands was disbanded, but as was typical in those days, and not potentially not uncommon these days, was that there was a revolving door amongst law enforcement agencies. So if you got kicked out of the Rangers or what have you, you would just go to the county level sheriff's department, or you would go to the Border Patrol, or you would go to some other law enforcement agency. So one of the important matters about, or aspects of the Canales investigation was one, as I mentioned, Mexican Americans using the mechanisms of the state itself to try to seek justice for crimes committed by state agents. I think that's clear. The second part is that it really begins to illuminate the limits to what we might call police reform today, because that's essentially what happened, or one of the outcomes was that the size of the ranger force was reduced, and the requirements to become a ranger were professionalized, right? They had to have a bond, which speaks to the question of qualified immunity. However, these reforms did not stop or put an end to the denial of due process or police brutality by the Rangers. I think, as Trini will take up in terms of its the relevance for today, other aspects such as technological fixes are not going to be sufficient to solve this problem either.
Okay. So how this history relates to the present, and particularly this present moment when we're having a discussion about the idea of race, the belief system built out of the idea of race is racism, and how that relates to, in particular, policing practices within our communities today. First, I want to lay out, and it's very important because I don't think a lot of people understand this, is that race is an idea. It is not a biological fact. It's not a scientific fact. It's something created by human beings that can be accepted or rejected, right? So you can reject racism. 300 years ago, there wasn't a concept called race. So I think we need to work towards understanding first it's an idea, and an idea we can get rid of. We work hard at it, right? And so with Black Lives Matter, what they're bringing to attention is this continued struggle by minority communities that go back to the 19th century in this country that are upset about policing, right? So Black Lives Matter has a context and a history. The work we talk about with, in this case, 1910 in Texas on law enforcement and state-sanctioned violence against Mexicanos is part of that history as well, right? And so while Refusing to Forget and Black Lives Matter come together, is we're both talking about the same issue: systemic racism within policing departments that are resulting in profiling, and in worst case scenarios, the death of individuals in custody that are unarmed. Okay? And this is key. These are unarmed individuals. And in this country, to be very clear, there's a dichotomy, a spectrum related to this idea of race, of white on one side and black on one side. Early in very early in the United States' history, it was deemed that only white people could be citizens, right? That goes back to 1790. It's not until we get to the 14th Amendment in the 1860s that says, no, if you're born here, you can be a citizen, right? Trying to get rid of color or the idea of race as a category for citizenship. But even though that was implemented, that didn't lead to civil rights or equality within our society. And so I think it's incumbent on us to know our history, a history that unfortunately has not been provided in our school curriculum, has not been provided in the monuments that we have. In fact, many of the monuments we have today that we see are coming down, which is a good thing, venerate the principles of racism, and particularly venerate the people who engaged in violent policing of communities, right? And so this is why this history is important. This history is important for understanding what we need to do today. And more importantly, it's a fundamental question of what values do we share? What are the values of us as a nation, right? And so this is where where Refusing to Forget comes into play and is in line with the efforts by Black Lives Matter to bring to the attention of the wider public that Black Lives Matter, which means that not Black lives are more important than other lives or other communities, but that we need to recognize that Black bodies have been viewed very differently and been treated very differently in this nation, just like Latinos have as well, and indigenous communities have as well, and Asian Americans as well. So this is where this history comes together.
So I think if we have time, we'd love to take some Q&A if we've got some time for that.
I think we are running a little short on time, then
Okay.
maybe we could do some questions at the end. How's that? Yes? Okay, thank you so much. That's fascinating. Wonderful history that I've heard about those Texas Rangers, bad people. Anyway, now we would like to get to our history maker for the evening. She is a fabulous woman. She's a friend of someone I've known for a while, someone I admire greatly. She is a powerhouse and she cares about our community deeply. She's always been involved with community. She was born and raised in Mexico City and she studied in Spain, Switzerland, and the US. Ana Valdez, who is our history maker, along with her husband, Jeff Valdez, founded a production company, the Valdez Productions Consulting, and currently she is the executive president of the Latino Donor Collaborative and the chair of trustees of the Southern California Public Radio. But she has an amazing history. Ana has worked at the United Nations Commission for the Human Rights as a presidential appointee for the Clinton administration, and she collaborated with the Nielsen's, Citibank, Colgate, Bristol-Myers, Squibb, Scott Paper, a lot of different corporations. She also consulted with Bill Richardson for the president when he was running for president, and she has worked with Dolores Huerta and so many other organizations and Latino community organizations. She was also on Fox 11's, she was the on-air political and media analyst and a blogger for My Fox Parents, Huffington Post, and CNN Online. Did I tell you she was accomplished? She sure is. She currently lives in Los Angeles, where we all are, and she is here with us to talk to us about what the Latino Donor Collaborative, where she is executive director, what they are doing, all the wonderful initiatives, and they speak for all Latinos and Mexican Americans at a very, very high level. So it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Ana Valdez to the History Maker event. You are a history maker, Ana. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Val. That introduction was way too generous, and I really thank you because you're one of my idols. So coming from you, it's really great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, you and Jose Luis. I am so excited about sharing some of the ideas and just being part of this organization. It's so powerful. Trini and John, I am a huge fan already of what you're doing. Just while you were presenting, it's incredible. I am good friends with David Hayes Bautista, which is on the side of California, uncovering California history of Latinos. And I think we have to gather the two of you guys' efforts, because we need to know our history. And you know what? This is what we always say at the Latino Donor Collaborative. This is not good for Latinos only. This is good for the whole set of Americans of any race. It is unheard of not to know the history of your own country because whoever wrote it decided to leave those things out. So thank you. Also, just if I could, I would just talk about what John and Trinity said all the time, but I know we have to talk about other subjects. But just to finish, Trini and John, I was, as Belle said, I was born and raised in Mexico, and when I moved here, which was late in my life, like I moved here when I was 28, I was baffled when my kids started going to school of how the story is being told, because I learned my history and I was a history buff in Mexico. And it's like you're talking about two different countries, literally. It just doesn't make sense.
Yes, I agree.
Isn't it true, Jose Luis? You were also born there.
Anna. And we are so honored to have you, by the way. We're very, very excited. It's a very special event for us. And as you know, we have had before you some great history makers, Ruiz Valdez and Alex Nogales and Ambassador Julia Nava. And it just so happened that today we have, for the first time, we have a Mexican American that was also, that actually is born in Mexico, you know? So you are the first.
Great.
We love to have this event because we want our friends to know who we really are. And you're somebody that we're very, very proud of. And so the purpose, as you know, of this event is to let our friends know more about these incredibly successful people, their stories, and because we want people to emulate who you are. You know, we want people to learn how you have become this powerful woman that is shaping the future of Latinos and Mexican Americans. So let me ask you a few questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And then we're so eager to listen to your story. So you already said you were born in Mexico City. Now, I think especially that you're the first Mexican-born history maker of our series. Tell us a little bit about how that feels. And you already started telling us, and that was very interesting to hear, you know, that the story of Mexicans in Mexico is such a different story than the Mexicans here. Tell us a little bit about how does it feel to be born in Mexico City?
Absolutely. So I feel like I live so many Mexican hats, right? I mean, first, the one that is mine and comes with my origin. I was Mexican for, you know, in Mexico, we have other kind of problems, but very different than the ones that happened here. Then I became a Mexican American immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant and, you know, but then I married a guy whose family came here in the 1520s, who also considers himself Mexican American. And then I heard all the story of the New Mexicans, Colorado kind of Mexicans, and it's interesting. There's so many stories, and of course I have uncles that were born and raised in Texas. So to your question, it is incredibly rich, and I am proud of every one of those parts. And it is devastating that that story is not being told, right? The New Mexico, the Texas, the California story. This is, we are all these people.
Yep. Yeah, our story has been told so poorly. Actually, we've been hidden out of this story, right?
Exactly.
So one thing that you tell us, and we know about you because I've done some research about you, Anna, is that you love education. And it's very interesting how we have found that many of our history, or all of our history makers, have that in common, that they all search for education. Some of them were not rich when they were born, and they struggled to get education. You love education, but your story might be a little bit different. And I would love to know, I think we all want to know, how is that you become so much in love with education, of history, as you mentioned? Tell us a little bit about that.
So when I was born and raised in Mexico, it was a time when, it was different, but women were not in general meant to be in the executive world, right? In the decision-making world. It is not like here, it's a different kind of, I don't even want to say discrimination, because I never felt discriminated, but we have different roles. Even now, things have changed a little bit, but in Mexico, people have different roles. And I personally never felt like I had that role. Like I was not meant to graduate from high school or from college and get married and forget about everything else. I just was never, right? My grandfather, I was the first, granddaughter and grandkid actually. And so my grandfather always said, no, you're not learning to cook and you're not learning to type. And so I just, my only chance was, okay, I'll learn biology and I'll learn history. And it was celebrated in my family, which I am so blessed for. And that's how I became a huge, empowered kind of woman, education advocate, because it allowed me to really live the life that I wanted to live.
Yeah, that is so wonderful. And I, being that you're so involved in helping the community in so many different ways, and you're so knowledgeable about this, I have an important question to ask, and I think many of our audience would be interested to know. In your case, and I think many cases that we have, in our previous interviews, we see that a strong family support is so important for people to grow and be so successful. How do we change that? How can we help other people that maybe don't have the fortune of people like you? They have a great family that prop them up, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I have a theory, and I have some numbers to prove the theory. Of course, and everybody has probably different point of views, but so as you know, at the Latino Donor Collaborative, what we do is data. We partner with a lot of different universities, and we create a real image of who Latinos are based on facts. So that's why research is so important. And one of the very important facts that we find is that the Latino community is extremely focused on education. And that is one of the most important parts of why we have a very high economic upward mobility. So I don't know if I'm sure, and I would love to share some links, but when people actually analyze upward mobility by race, Latinos go a little higher than whites, almost like Asians. And everything has to do with the focus on education. Even people that come here with absolutely no education, they believe that part of the American dream they came here to find is send their kids to school, to a good public school whenever it's possible. But even if it's not great, they have to go to school. And last piece of data that I'm gonna share on this is that the dropout rate in 1990 for Latinos was 69. The dropout rate today for Latinos is 93. I'm sorry, not dropout, on the contrary. The high school graduation was 69%, and today is 93. You're talking about, imagine Mexico with a 93% graduation of high school. We would be competing with the United States directly. So here, Latinos graduate 93% of the times from high school. And the best number that I love is that 69% of those graduating from high school enroll in some kind of college. So to your point, Jose Luis, yes, I think we have to help people that don't have support, but we already come with a lot of, in our DNA, we have this passion for education.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful news that I think all of us need to know. And I think tonight we're learning so many things, and that is a very important thing. It should make us all very proud and very happy that it's true, that we believe in education. And certainly you have proved that. You study in Mexico first in the Tecnológico de Monterrey, then you study in Europe. And then you have, obviously, because you're a hard worker and a good student, you got an opportunity to work at the United Nations organization in Geneva and the Human Rights Commission. Mm-hmm. So what would you tell us of this amazing opportunity? What did you learn? What can we learn from that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. My theme, my motto is, be in the right time at the right place. It's about being prepared for opportunities. And if I told you how I ended up in each one of those places that are so amazing and that I'm so proud of having been to, was exactly that. You do the hard work, you open your eyes and find opportunities. And the great news is you have what it takes. And so one of the greatest things about America, in my opinion, about the United States, is this American dream, right? And I feel like, when you do your homework, when you're prepared, the opportunities are there and you take the opportunity. And it is basically that. I tell my kids, that's basically life. Prepare yourself. God knows what's in front of you. But by the time the opportunity comes, you'll be ready. And it's a little bit of what I can tell you, with those opportunities.
I think that's what they say. Luck is a combination of preparation and opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So it's not luck. It's never luck. It's the hard work, as you said. You're prepared, and when you have the opportunity, you take it. Yeah. You had an opportunity that I think very few people would ever have. You actually had the opportunity to work with the Clinton-Gore campaign, you know, and then with that, you build a relationship, obviously, where Bill Clinton asked you to be a special assistant for Latin America at the U.S. Department of Energy. So, you know, again, we're very proud of you, and we want to learn from you. We want to know what did that teach you that it will teach us?
Yeah, you know what? Again, I was lucky to be at the right time at the right place. When I came to the United States, I was actually doing my thesis for a PhD that I actually have never done, and I'm not happy about it. Eventually, one day, you're going to see this old lady going into school again, and I'm going to get my PhD, but I didn't. I came here to do my thesis, and I really got lucky because my thesis was a mix between marketing and politics. And I had an aunt that knew somebody in the volunteer department at the White House that got me a job as a volunteer, as an intern. I was young, and so as an intern, right? I had a master's already, so that helped. But I worked there for 3 months, and my bosses liked my work. I am a little obsessive. I have to say I'm a little OCD. You know, I was sometimes the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. You know, was really kind of into what I was doing. And so the campaign started, and they said, why don't you just go out there, work in the campaign, and when we come back, we'll consider an appointment. And I came to California, actually, from Washington, D.C., and I worked in the campaign here. And it was fascinating to start with because it was exactly what I loved, which was marketing and politics. And then by the time Clinton and Gore were reelected, they offered me to be the head of the volunteer department of the transition team and later on the inaugural. And so I was in charge of managing 5,000 volunteers, you know, from, you know, volunteers from the Boy Scouts and the, you know, ACLU and every organization that wanted to send people to volunteer. And it was a great introduction to the next administration, which was the second Clinton Gore. And I got an appointment. And so again, it was so interesting because yes, I never did my PhD. I never finished my PhD yet. But I got a great opportunity, and I got to see, you know, history in the making. And contrary to what happens right now, Clinton was really admired in the administration. So the people that were working for him, they loved him. It was really a little bit of a cult, if you may. And so people were happy. They wanted to make a change. It was a very young administration. And so there was a great atmosphere. And it was when the Latino caucus and Latino appointees started getting very important and very, very powerful. There was a whole department within what is called presidential personnel, which is the department within the White House that gives presidential appointments. There was a whole department within that department for Latino appointments. So, it really was a fascinating time to be there.
So what advice would you give, you know, many of our current listeners and future listeners on how can they get themselves in a situation like that, where they might be able to actually be involved in politics at that level and you know, move our community forward? What advice would you give them specifically?
You know, specifically for Latinos,
yes,
the advice that I'm giving lately a lot is get a voice. You know, I was raised with calladita te ves más bonita. And I believe that it's part of how we are raised in general in our culture. And I believe that that's one of the reasons why we don't have yet a Black Lives Matter, what we don't have a Jesse Jackson, whether you agree with him or not. You know, for example, in entertainment, when you know, people used to say, oh, Jesse is in the house, and networks and studios would tremble. We don't have that, right? We haven't had a Latino president yet. And I really don't think has nothing to do with merit. It has to do with the fact that we are not, you know, raised to have a loud voice. And so that's my first, advice is get a voice in the classroom, get a voice in your family, get a voice in your group of friends. It doesn't matter if you become the leader or not, but just learn to have a voice, learn to not avoid being controversial. I think that that starts at home. And as parents, we should stop cutting our kids' wings when they have an opinion. Because as a Mexican mom, I have done it, right? Like, no, you're wrong. That shouldn't be happening. You know what? No, let's give them the space. Let them make mistakes. Let them say silly things, you know, and, you know, and just let them grow that voice.
Yeah, you know, some of our previous events, we've talked about the fact that we sometimes we're too humble. You know, we've been raised to be too humble, and maybe that was, you know, just like in history, we see how history really has an effect on who we are, and you know, it really affects our opportunity to be more successful because we're too humble.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. I think, and so now we move into the next chapter, Anna. So now you're in Los Angeles. You have all these great opportunities. You have decided, which you mentioned already, that your passion was a combination of politics and marketing. And now you get together with your husband, Jeff, and you start really like putting all together and creating this exciting things, you know, cable. You started a cable network. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit of what happened after that.
So it's so funny how life works, because I really never intended to meet Jeff and you know, and become part of, you know, of a company that produces content for entertainment. But long ago, when I was, and Jose Luis, you were born and raised in Mexico. Maybe you remember this campaign that was called Ciérrale. In Mexico, there was a big problem with the lack of water. That was, I don't know, 30 years ago. And the government created this campaign called Ciérrale, which meant like ciérrale, right? Like close the faucet. And they solved the problem because people became aware of, you know, the way they were wasting water, and they solved the problem. And I remember thinking marketing and politics can change the world. So then, you know, fast forward, and I married Jeff, and he has a production company. And I start realizing that we can make a lot of like a big difference. We can really create a huge change, right? Exactly as you were saying at the beginning, rather than having shows about narcos and, you know, and horrible people being exploited, how about creating the shows of, you know, the Cosby Show for Latinos, or maybe the Fresh Prince for Latinos, because that will really create a change. And so we started creating content that was positive, that had a great, that really created an image of all the spectrum of who we are, because I am madly in love with people like our housekeepers and our gardeners. And I mean, I think that that's the base that I adore. But you know what? I'm also madly in love with their kids. Their kids become doctors and lawyers and marketing experts. And so that's the spectrum that we have to talk about, right? And so we started creating that. And one of the greatest things that we've done is the Brothers Garcia. And I don't know if you've watched it, but it was for a number of years in Nickelodeon. And there are still grown-ups right now that say, oh my God, that show really showed me that I was a real American, that I actually existed. I didn't feel like I was being ignored. And at certain point, great investors, and this amazing, specifically an investor that I adore, whose name is Bruce Barshop, and his father, they said, you know what? Those shows are being really successful. How come we're not making more of them? You know, Latinos are watching, but not only Latinos are watching, everybody's watching those shows because it's a good show and it's a good story. And that's how CTV was created. Mm-hmm. And we said, you know, if we can program channels like ABC and CBS and HBO and Showtime, why not create our own channel, right? So that's how the channel was born.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, what we need to do is we need to tell our story and all the different, you know, just like, like the color purple, you know, for African Americans really made a very humongous difference. Probably a movie or a story about John and Trinidad's story that, you know, refusing to forget would be something that everybody should listen to. You know, that would allow our community to understand why, you know, why it was done. You know, try to take away our land and our possessions, and how that brings that story down to the present. You know, I know that now you are the executive president of the Latino Donor Collaborative, and that's such a powerful organization. Is doing so much good for our community, and certainly we want to know, you know, how can that help our audience? How is that? What are you guys doing? Tell us a little bit about your beautiful work, please.
Absolutely. So the Latino Donor Collaborative is a nonprofit, but it's a very different nonprofit, right? It's a very unique nonprofit because it is fully funded by the members. The board, basically, our board is a group of powerful Latinos that came from nothing, most of them, that donate money to create a real perception of who Latinos are. And we decided at the very beginning that that would be done by data that was fact-based, so that there was no, it was irrefutable. And the easiest data is the economic one, right? And because green talks, right? Money talks. Our job is to use that data that we create to show decision makers in this country the money that they are leaving on the table by not including Latinos. So in content creators, we say, you know why, and this is an incredible number that I actually just learned. Do you know why Univision nationwide has much higher ratings most of the nights than any of the networks in English? Because even though Latinos now, most of them speak English, they can't see themselves in English. So they are actually still watching Spanish because otherwise they are invisible. So we do that for content, the same as we do that for corporations. So your advertising is showing only certain communities and you're missing our community. There's a really great case with Baby Gap, who refused to put Latino looking babies in their advertising. And guess where they are? They are basically bankrupted, right? Because almost 30% of the babies being born today are Latinos. So if you don't want to put a Latino baby on your advertising, you're really doomed. Yeah. So that's the kind of argument that we do.
That's very powerful. Good job. Good job. It reminds me a little bit of some of the work that our good friend, and I know it's your friend, Alex Nogales, and the National Hispanic Association. Yeah. But I'm gonna ask you one very, we chatted before, and I told you I was gonna ask you some difficult questions.
Of course, absolutely.
So, and you told me that you wanted to. So I have a question about, specifically because we know you're a Mexican American. A little bit like me, because you're a Mexican American by choice, right? Because exactly. We both were born in Mexico and we both chose to be Americans, Mm-hmm. So one thing that we even said earlier today about the lack of unity between the Mexican Americans. I mean, one of them, and we have discussed this with previous history makers, we call each other by so many different names. Sometimes we don't even know Chicano, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, we don't really know, so there's a lot of lack of unity, and that lack of unity has made us, as you said earlier, very weak in regards to politics, because we're such a large number. We should definitely have a lot more influence. We should be able to have enough influence that we can start changing that narrative that exists out there, but we haven't been able to do that yet. But of course, with all the great work. Now, how do you feel about that? What do you think that we can do to create more unity, specifically between the Mexican American community? We know, the ones are born there, the ones that are born here, the ones that are multiple generations. Well, how can we change that?
That's a great question, Jose Luis. And it is in certain, you know, ways challenging. I think that, first of all, with immigration being negative from Mexico, as you know, there are more people living back to Mexico than coming in since 2008. With this anti-immigration wave, immigrants are not coming. So most of the people that are here that were not born here came here before 20 years ago. So I think that difference will start really fading. Their kids are born here. Their kids are completely integrated. So I think that difference will disappear little by little. I also feel that Gen X, the Gen Z's people, the kids that are 25 or less are incredibly powerful. I think they've been dealt cards that we never expected they would have, right? I mean, starting with September 11, and then everything that the craziness that has happened in the last 12 years. And I do believe that those kids have a complete different way of seeing things. I ask my kids, they go to a school that is very multicultural. And so they come back and they say, or they're playing a, you know, football or whatever. And they come back and they say, Mom, I met a Latino. And I'm like, oh, that's so great. Where are their parents from? And they literally look at me like, I don't know, who cares? You know, they're like, I don't care. I didn't even ask. You know what I mean? It's this group of kids that really don't care. And that Alexandra Ocasio is extremely powerful because she's Latina. They don't even know where she came from or where, you know, they really don't care. Or Rosario Dawson, they identify with her. And it doesn't matter if she's African, Latino, Afro-Latino, you know. So I do believe that we older people have to adapt to that. I think we really have to admire it and just join them.
Yeah. How do you feel, continuing with the difficult questions, how do you feel when you're continue to hear in the news this specific attacks against Mexicans, you know, and of course our friends from Texas know this, you know, then Laredo, there was a person that went and killed 30 Mexicans. He was like, I want to kill as many Mexicans as possible. It seems like there's always that specific thing against Mexicans. I mean,
Yeah.
Of course you're Mexican, so I'm sure that hurts you, you know.
Absolutely.
How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that?
It's devastating. It is hurtful at every level, and it diminishes the country, quite frankly. It really diminishes the whole country. You know, it is hurtful. It makes me feel sometimes powerless. And the one thing I wish I could give you a solution, but the one thing I can tell you is that when I feel more powerless, when Trump launches his campaign saying that Mexicans are rapists and criminals, that's when groups like our group was born, right? That's when people start getting their voices out, knowing that it's survival time. You know, you cannot go on allowing people to say that Mexicans are rapists and criminals. That's when really they pinch your rib and they say, okay, are you going to talk now? Because if you don't, then when? Right?
Yeah, definitely. That has to activate all of us, right?
It has to. And we have to get out of our comfort zone and stop like this mentality of don't make waves. Oh, you know, va a caer por su propio peso. No. He won't fall by his own weight, like we say in Spanish. You know, it won't happen. You need to, you know, to activate and have a voice, because what else can we do? And then use our information. And I tell all the audience, and I tell my wonderful co-panelists, use our information. You're not going out there saying, you know, don't be nice. You're mean to me, or I am charity. We're not. You know, according to every single report, Latinos are driving the growth of the economy. Latinos are buying 56% of all the new houses. Latinos are founding 83% of all the new businesses in this country. So we're not charity. You need us, America, much more than we need you. And I think using our voice with those numbers have to make people aware, because if we're not here, they wouldn't grow. We contribute, our GDP, the Latino GDP, that's one of the reports that we have, is $2.3 trillion. If we were Latinos, were an economy, we would be the this year we would be the 8th largest. And I say Latinos, Jose Luis, because I am a passionate Mexican, but I also know that numbers are in our favor. Almost 70% of all Latinos are Mexican. So when I'm talking about Latinos, I'm mostly talking about Mexicans, but the other 30-something% is also empowering for us. So I never forget where I came from. I love being Mexican. I'm fanatic about it, but I usually gather forces with other Latinos because I think our numbers will really conquer.
Yeah, I think unity is powerful. No question about it. I think that you have taught us so much tonight. I would love to ask you a final question, and that is always my favorite final question, and that is if you were to speak to young Ana Valdez at age 10, what advice would you give her?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I would get, besides having a voice and not being afraid of having a voice, don't be afraid of making mistakes. I think that is the second kind of lecture that I give to my kids. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Take risks, good risks. Don't go do drugs. That's not a smart risk. That's really stupid. Take risks in informed and positive risks that may draw you back if you lose, but that won't destroy you, because every failure made us better. And the 5 of us here in the audience, in the panel, tell me if it's not true. Every failure made you better. And the more failures, the better you become. So if I had one advice for young people, it would be, don't be afraid of making mistakes.
Very good. Well, I can tell you that I know I've learned a tremendous amount. I think I feel empowered after listening to your story. I think we hope that this wonderful interview will empower a lot of young Mexican American and Latino girls to want to be the next Ana Valdez. I can tell you that learning from John Morán González and Trinidad Gonzalez, realizing and trying to remember, what happened to our ancestors, and that was powerful, because if we don't remember the past just keeps repeating itself, right? Belle, we're always so thankful that you're part of our organization. We thank you for wonderful introduction. Do we have any final questions from anybody?
Can I just make one, since we have the platform?
Yes.
Everything can be better if we vote. So there is a campaign going around that's I am a voter. So get on your Instagram, and what you do is to register your friends. Send out to, first check that you're registered, then send it out to 5 friends with the hashtag Register a Friend Day. And we're trying to get, because that's how we have our voices heard. Come November, we gotta have a new president. And we're not gonna get that unless we all unite, the Mexicans, Salvadorians, all the cultures that come to the US. Get out there and register a friend to vote. So you can find it on Instagram. It's all over the place. Please, vote.
Good job. I agree with you 100%.
Super great, yeah.
John Morán González. Oh, sorry. John, could you tell us a final thought? Do you have a final thought for us, my friend?
It's been wonderful to be here, to be able to share a bit of Refusing to Forget's project. I've listed a couple of resources for anybody who's wants to read up on this. It's in the chat. And also just how wonderful it is to share the stage with Ana Valdez. And thank you once again for the invitation.
John,
thank you, John. It's an honor with you to share it with you.
Well, my friends, It's been such a wonderful pleasure to spend the time with you. I leave the final words to our wonderful host, La Plaza de Cultura, and Abelardo. Abelardo, any final words for our friends? Your microphone is off, Abelardo.
Mike.
You think that I'd
Hear
learned?
you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
you can.
Okay, you think I'd know this by now. But 40 plus sessions into En Casa con la Plaza. We thank you so much, Dr. Ruiz, along with the Mexican American Cultural Education Foundation, for hosting these monthly Mexican American History Maker sessions. Thank you, Ana, Professor John Morán González, Trinidad Gonzalez, Dr. Jose Luis Ruiz, and Bel Hernandez. We have a lot of questions, a lot of comments. What I'm going to do is send these questions and comments to our panelists so that you can communicate directly to them. They're asking about the Texas Rangers. They're asking about the, where you got the information about us being the seventh economy, book
In
suggestions.
our website.
Yeah. Latino Donor Collaborative.org.
Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Why don't you go ahead and write it on the chat there?
Absolutely. I will.
And then I'll write it on our Facebook page and on our on Watch Party that I also started. So thank you, of course, to all of you out there who have been able to enjoy these programs with us, to learn, to be educated, to be entertained. These couldn't be done without our sponsors, of course. SoCal Gas, a very proud sponsor of La Plaza, En Casa con la Plaza programs, along with the California Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act. Okay, and thanks to you, of course, our viewers, for tuning in. If you enjoy our En Casa sessions, please join us as members of La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. You'll be the first to know about all of our great programs, when we're going to be opening, a ver cuándo, pero soon we hope. And also if you did not catch up with the entire session, you can catch up with this one, plus the 40 plus more on our website, which is www.laplazala.org. Also on our YouTube page, they're all there, including last month's Mexican American History Makers, and I'll post it on our comment section as well. Upcoming sessions. This is just Tuesday, and we have two more. We had one yesterday. Tomorrow night, a wonderful panel, When Community Creates Exhibitions, the Making of Afro-Latinidad, Mi Casa, My City, an exhibition which we opened on February 22nd. We had to unfortunately close the museum on March 14th, so very few of you had a chance to view it, a first of its kind, talking about the Afro-Latinidad community here in Los Angeles. So you'll hear the participants of the team who conceived and formed the exhibitions. That's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And then on Friday night, Nancy Sanchez, a singer-songwriter, who'll be singing, we'll be in conversation with her, talking about Mexican-American art pop. And then on Mondays is our La Plaza, En Casa con la Plaza Cocina, our afternoon cooking demonstrations. Lola Dweck from Lola's Cocina, the food and travel blog, will be demonstrating breakfast, molletes, and agua fresca. Doesn't that sound delicious?
Yeah.
Again.
Delicioso.
So muchas gracias a todos. Thank you all, panelists, Dr. Ruiz. Can't wait for the next one next month. To all of you out there, muchas gracias a todos. Buenas noches, buenas tardes. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.